Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Genevieve Westcott with your inside oil on the rural economy as it affects you in the ag sector. In this edition, it's D-Day for sheep farmers. They have to decide whether to back a new wool co-op desperate to unite nearly half of the strong wool production. What are the chances those farmers will get in behind? Australian Prime Minister Julia Gillard apologizes for her dreadful Aussie accent and prepares to sign a deal with our Prime Minister for stronger economic ties during her first official visit here. What's that likely to mean for us and our closest trade partner? And why are the offshore prices for lamb, mutton, beef, and wool way up on last season, despite soft North American and European economies? Just how good will it be for New Zealand sheep and beef farmers this season? All this and much, much more coming up, starting with those global equities. They continue to charge ever higher over the past week. Joining us now to tell us all about it is ASB rural economist James Shortall. And James, it's great news around the world.
Well, yeah, the last week again, global equities have increased. Probably been a bit uncertain over the past 24 hours. They actually decreased, but all in all, equities have been surging ahead over the past few weeks. And
President Obama, let's go over to the States now. He's about to take a big fat knife to the American deficits. What's that telling you?
Well, it's probably been required, and it has been seen to be quite positive for equity markets because, of course, that probably does need to happen. The debt situation in the US is quite severe, but it's interesting. It's gathered a bit of scepticism as to whether it's achievable this year ahead. Then the US budget deficit is going to be massive, over $2 trillion. Their debt position is going to be outside the size of their economy. So they've got a long way to go, and there's some question marks as to whether that's actually going to be achievable.
Let's go to Egypt. President Mubarak, since last we met, has been toppled. What's that doing to shares around the world?
Well, initially when the news came out, it was seen to be quite positive, just by the fact that we might start to see things settling down. Of course, with so much turmoil over the past few weeks, then that does provide some uncertainty for markets, and markets don't like uncertainty. So you know, the fact that we're starting to see some wheels move, you know, does provide a bit more certainty, and some of the focus has gone back to what's happening around the global economy.
Yeah, and no free democratic elections for at least 6 months. That's a long time for the markets.
Well, that's right. That's right. I mean, I guess some of the trade flows may open up, and when you start to look at the Suez Canal, it's very important for a lot of part of the world.
Absolutely. What's going to happen to that oil, which, by the way, is still sitting at what, about 100 US a barrel?
Yeah, well, oil has been trading very, very high. You know, that's probably some of the energy costs and the demand around the world for high energy, and that's having an impact down on corn prices and other products that are around the world. So that's something important to note, and we're actually forecasting that the oil will stay strong. Unfortunately for farmers, that's going to mean that fuel costs aren't coming down soon.
New Zealand dollar, how's it doing?
Yeah, New Zealand dollar has been tracking quite high, but over the past few days has tracked down a little bit. Yesterday, we heard Standard & Poor's come out and sort of make a few comments about the New Zealand economy, saying that some of the moves from the government are good, but you know, they're probably not looking to change their status on the New Zealand economy anytime soon. So that played on the New Zealand dollar. Retail sales have also been weak, which means consumption in New Zealand's weak, and that's been a problem for us for a while now. So the Kiwis traded back just over 75 cents against the US.
Now, the global food price indexes continue to rocket ever upwards. What's going on there, James?
Well, I mean, it's exactly what we've been seeing over the past 6 months with commodity prices around the world increasing significantly. Last week here in New Zealand, the food prices lifted again in January.
They were way up, yeah.
So you know, farmers that are going to the supermarket, then as all consumers, then you know, prices are getting higher, and we think that's going to continue just because you know, we can't have on one hand high dairy prices, high meat prices, high wool prices, and you know, expect to pay a little bit less at the shop counter. So.
Now listen, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is picking that the global grain prices are going to tighten up. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, the grain situation is in a major bind at the moment, just because the supplies are so tight. We've had droughts around the world.
Don't hold back. Why don't you say what you really mean?
Well, I think this is quite bullish for grain prices this year, and we only need to have a very small shock in the market. Some more dry conditions in the northern hemisphere through this coming summer. And that's going to be devastating for the grain market. All of a sudden, we've got grain supplies are down to record lows. That means there's not much fat in the system, and really, the analysts are suggesting that we're going to need to have 2 bumper crop harvests the next 2 years just to get back to a more stable market. So that's an issue.
Meantime, the Americans are turning corn and a whole lot of it into ethanol.
Yeah, well, when you've got oil at $100 per barrel, then it starts to make sense to produce a bit more ethanol. And right now that's been a big issue for the corn market, and there's a big reason why we're seeing supplies dwindle at the moment. So the Americans are using about 40% of their corn into ethanol, which is severe, and that's reducing their exports too.
And what's it going to mean for our farmers and livestock needs?
Well, I think it's really positive for livestock around the world. Typically, when corn prices are moving higher, then that's also positive for livestock producers in terms of what they get for their cattle and for their milk, because of course in most of the big producing nations, then corn's a big part of their feed input system. So I think it's positive, and I think it's going to be an underlying factor through this year and perhaps even to next year, depending on what happens there.
Thanks, James. Coming up after the break, Stuart Locke joins the panel. With a PhD in finance and economics, he knows agribusiness. He's here with his expert opinion. Plus, one of our few listed agriculture companies thinks shareholders should say yes to a partial takeover offer from Chinese interests. Would it keep the wolf from the door, as PGG writes in post-poor half-year results? And TransPower prepares to put 8 Waikato farms on the block at prices expected to be well below what the state-owned company paid for them. Will overseas investors buy cheap? But first, answer this in our Farmers' Facts and Figures quiz. How much money has been paid out so far to kiwi fruit growers for vines removed because of the deadly PSA virus? The answer when we come back. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you how much money has been paid out so far to kiwi fruit growers for vines removed because of the deadly PSA virus. The answer, more than $3.5 million has been given in compensation. Here's a question. If you were a PGG Wrightson shareholder, would you accept that partial takeover offer from Chinese interests? Joining us now is Associate Professor of Finance, Stuart Locke from Waikato University. He's got his finger on the pulse of the world of agribusiness. What do you think, Stuart?
I'd be inclined to accept. I can't see that there's any reason to believe that Wrightson's, under its current control, is likely to do any better. So if I was a shareholder, is the price going to go up in the near future? I can't see it happening. It's dropped steadily over the last few years, and Wrightson's has destroyed a huge amount of value for shareholders over the last 5 years, and I think people are probably better off getting out, putting their money into something else.
What do you think, James? Apparently there's this mystery bidder that we're not supposed to know is Agrium, the big Canadian conglomerate.
Yeah, I mean, the talk's been around the town for the last week or 10 days as to who this mystery bidder is, if they're going to come into the market. Potentially it could be Agrium. So who knows really, but of course for shareholders then, if they, the directors have said potentially to accept the offer, but to wait out and see whether another offer does come in. There's still a bit of time to go before they have to send in their acceptance forms, but of course if another bidder does come into the mix, then they're going to have to offer more money, so it's going to be better for shareholders.
Now, Stuart, Agria already has a 19% interest in PGG, of course. They came in saying that they were experts in sort of the rural economy and they would do great things in China. Apparently it hasn't happened.
Yeah, they're touting themselves as having the expertise to turn the company around, to forge better international links, and so open up channels into China for New Zealand farmers and producers. They sort of are saying we've got a big marketplace out there, it's our expertise that will open this up for you, and so suppliers and others in New Zealand, manufacturers, are going to do better. It's not saying that shareholders wanting to hang in there are likely to do any better.
Yeah, and of course there's that old thing that we always hear about, Chinese investors coming in, taking advantage of a New Zealand company that's doing poorly. Is that on?
Well, again, why is it doing poorly? Could it not do this itself? And it's had plenty of time to do this, to open up those opportunities, and it's failed to do so. And so I think the investor has to be a little dispassionate and say, well, I need my money to work, and there's no point in seeing it just sit there or decline. We've got to do something with it. So again, I think I'd be saying, accept, move my money to something else. If there is a counter offer in the next couple of weeks, fine. But just hanging on to something that may happen, and it can't happen after the acceptance day.
One concern that I would have is that we're going to see a lot of intellectual property that's been built up through New Zealand, through the seed business. That's, I guess, one of the key reasons why Agri want to be involved, because they see big potential for it. We're hearing big stories around the world. More food, we're going to need to be more efficient, more productive about producing this food, and we Kiwis are pretty good at doing that sort of thing, and we're quite efficient at doing it. And I think we do have quite a bit of intellectual property built up into PGG Wrightson's. It would be a shame to see that go overseas because it potentially will under this offer. But of course, right now, then the offer that is in the mix makes sense based on those current cash flows. But we may also be given away quite a bit over the next 10 to 20 years. Good
point. And talking about giving it away, Stuart, in your neck of the woods over in Waikato, apparently Transpower's about to put 8 fairly big farms up on the blocks to sell. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that's, again, a good thing. There's no reason for Transpower to be in the land business, other than rights of way for its pylons. It doesn't have any obvious advantage in the farming area. So we released the farms, and they're likely to sell it below the prices that Transpower paid for them, but then it paid for them at a market time when prices were a lot higher. So an opportunity for people to get in there and buy. Again, we're asking the question, will they be foreign owners coming in? If it is, why is it that we don't want to buy the farms here? And it's the same thing with James raised about the intellectual property for Wrightson's. Why is the share price so low if we reasonably believe that in the future it's going to be worth something?
Stuart, we don't want to buy, or we can't buy, we can't afford it. James?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issues are that we can't afford it, and perhaps our investment horizons are, the next couple of years, as opposed to we were talking about some of the Chinese or the people that are out there. They really do have. We talk about food shortages, but we don't feel it here in New Zealand. It's the Asian population that are struggling to feed themselves, and so they have an investment horizon looking at food. They're looking at 50 years. We might be talking about 5 or 10 years. So quite different. But when we're talking about some buying some farms, then we are struggling a little bit with coming up with the cash to do it.
Stuart, it's D-Day, of course, for the sheep farmers. Are they going to go for the new wool co-op, the kind of Fonterra-style venture?
Again, I think they won't. Personally, I think it's probably a better model, a cooperative model. But again, the timing seems to me not to really favour it. We've seen the prices going up.
That's right. Critics are saying, look at the global wool prices. Why do we need it now? What do you say to that?
That's saying that the prices are going up, and I think that's true. And a lot of the circumstances leading to that, floods in Australia, fire in Australia has knocked out a whole series of things. So, we've got a large part of Queensland as lamb soup. And I think that's pushing prices up, and the futures market's certainly reading that in and saying there's going to be a shortage of supply. So we're getting good prices now. Can we sustain it? Can we have the research and development that will breed better fibre, better ways of processing things in the future? I think the answer is no, without the collective. I think the industry is too fragmented, does need to come together. But getting people to come together when they're feeling comfortable with high prices, I think that's much harder.
And they've extended the deadline, 3 times now? This is it, do or die. Why do you think they are so reluctant to come together, James? Do you have a theory?
I personally think that industry consolidation is required. It has happened. I don't necessarily, the recent increases in prices have been a market fundamental that have happened around the world for cotton prices, wool prices, all fibre prices. But really to sustain that and to go down the value chain to get more value out of it, which New Zealanders need to do, and farmers farmers need to do, then we need some consolidation, and we need a a one desk sort of seller into the open market.
Meantime, of course, Julia Gillard has crossed the ditch, her first official visit here. And what do we hear? The government is selling off 34 three-year-old BMW limousines to bring in a whole bunch of new expensive ones. That's a little hard to take for the average farmer, wouldn't you say, Stuart?
Yeah, I think farmers prefer Holdens, really.
Yeah, I would say.
But, the amount involved, I think, is really quite minuscule in terms of the overall budget.
The amount may be small, but what about the message here? I mean,
well, yeah, I guess the message is one of a bit like city councillors falling asleep at council meetings.
That's right.
And
do
getting
as
their
I
fees
say,
for
not
it.
as I do.
Yeah, I think it's probably not a good image, but overall the financial consequences of it, I think, are pretty small. I think there are more important issues to concentrate on here.
Talk to me about that.
Community.
But with Julia here, of course, she wants closer economic ties. Is this going to be win-win for them and not so good for the smaller Kiwi economy?
Oh, I think it's win-win for all of us. I think our future lies much more closely aligned with Australia. We need that market and the freer access to it. We, for years, have had farmers leaving here, going to northern Tasmania and starting dairy farming and moving into Australia. A large proportion of our population keeps drifting across there. I think we just need to recognise that union needs to be a lot closer. We've had a movement from New Zealand Government's superannuation fund into buying land and dairy farms.
Correct.
In the recent past. So I think with the Kiwi Fund investments, there is more money available, and if they start to add some rural property to the portfolios, I think that will be a good thing. So I agree with James, private funds are a bit on the low side, but there is superannuation fund and pension fund money slowly becoming available, and when we compare that with Australia, that's been the strength of the Australian investments into the resources sector and so on over the last decade, because they've had basically compulsory superannuation since the mid-80s.
Okay, let's talk about the New Zealand economy generally. Double-dip recession now. We know, James, I know you hate that term, but we're not going great guns at the moment. The government is finally going to do some slashing of the public sector. I say, what took them?
Yeah, well, I mean, the New Zealand economy, it's going to continue to bump along for a little while yet, and we probably are going to start, seeing some decent growth in 2012. It's still, a year. We're only at the beginning of 2011 yet, so still a while away. But we're going to be coming off a low base, and there's still a lot of water to go under the bridge before that does happen. And
that puts a lot of pressure on our exporters. Are the exporters going to be able to pick up the slack for all the other deficiencies, Stuart?
Well, I'm inclined to the view that the export sector is doing relatively well. The dollar has eased just a fraction, down around the 0.75. Maybe it'll bump up a few cents in the next few months. But if we're getting good prices for lamb, if the dairy prices are continuing to go up, and Fonterra says that we should view the latest auction prices as normal, then that's good for money coming into the rural sector, some retirement of debt, but I'd far prefer to see growth of savings and investment money available through exporters bringing money in than a retail-led recovery where all we're doing is buying cheap Indian shirts. Speaking of exports, James, how did we do overnight on the global dairy trade?
Once again, very positive global dairy trade auction. Whole milk powder was up nearly 8%, and across all the products, it was up just under 4%. So I think it's really positive. We personally think that the dairy sector is going to be really good this year and into next year, sort of around that $7 mark, which is going to be great news, and farmers are going to be able to pay off some debt, and it's going to facilitate the economy.
And if we can only get that rural broadband rolled out as they have in Australia, maybe Julia could give John a few tips on that.
Yeah, that's still a bit of an edgy problem for us. I again really believe we need this, that we need the technology. As a small country, we've got to get more money into infrastructure, and that sort of technology is going to be important to us in terms of our competing in a global world. Again, I think that we probably need more research about how rural communities will use the broadband. I think we're light on case studies as to how it can alter things and how we can encourage people to really use it. But I feel a bit of a tension about this decision to go for 2G, 3G on the conservative side again. When we see Telstra announcing that it's going to roll out the full 4G into rural Australia. So, I have some sympathy with Cordia on that issue, that maybe they were just dropped out a little early. Well,
I'll tell you what, with the election coming, I don't think the government's going to race in to change anything quick. Thank you, gentlemen. Coming up after the break, future-proof. What our experts will be watching, analyzing, and assessing in the next 7 days. Get on board for the ride and find out where they're headed. But first, a question for you in our Farmers Facts and Figures quiz. What was New Zealand's total rural sector debt in December? The answer when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back to Money Talks. Just before the break, we asked you, what was New Zealand's total rural sector debt in December? The answer, almost $48 billion, according to the Reserve Bank. And now it's time for Future Proof. What's coming up that our experts will be watching? James, what are you going to be watching?
Later on this week, then the Fed meeting minutes will be out, and it's going to be interesting to see what they have decided. And I'm not expecting that they would have changed any interest rates, but they might give a view as to what they're going to do later on in the year. And of course, the US economy still got some way to go, but here in New Zealand, then we've got a little way to go also. So the difference in those interest rates has been boosting our currency up, and I suspect that if they start to become a little bit more bullish about their economy, then we may start to track back against the US dollar, which we now starting to forecast sort of drifting back down to around 70 cents by the end of the year.
And I see over in Britain, of course, their inflation has gone up. Does that mean interest rates there are going to go up? They're up at what, about 4% at the moment?
Yeah, well, that's the pick that they potentially may start to lift interest rates down the track. So we're also forecasting that the pound's going to start strengthening a little bit against the Kiwi, which will be good news for sheep farmers. It's not going to be drastic, considering where we are right now. Then we're not going to get back into the 30s, but we may get back into the low 40s probably over the next sort of 9 to 12 months.
Now, I was intrigued in the break. You had a pretty good idea that the government could use to flog those farms in the Waikato. What was that again?
Yeah, well, thinking outside the square, then they've obviously got a few BMWs to get rid of. Maybe they could, throw in the BMW free for a farm,
Hey, that's not bad. I'm really interested myself watching the Middle East and what's going to happen there. We know that Mubarak in Egypt has now, of course, been rolled. But the question is, how's that going to affect the other countries? Yemen, Iran, potential to be explosive. Stuart, what are the implications, do you think, watching this crisis unfold?
Well, I guess the main threat there is if this rolls through other Middle Eastern nations, is this going to impact on our exports of sheep meat? We've put a lot of effort into developing those halal markets in the Middle East and organising ourselves in a way that ensures that we meet all the standards and so on. The live sheep meat thing is always a controversial issue, but we've developed those markets. If things become unsettled, then letters of credit and arrangements for exporting becomes a little bit more difficult. Markets start to break down. So I think there is a potential problem for us on that side. I guess the other area is the fuel costs and what's going to happen there, and you've spoken about that. And for our farmers, if that means bringing in more palm food, palm oil foods and so on for feeding during the winter periods, then this is just really bad news for the orangutans.
Well, and the other thing we haven't talked about, fertilizer prices. They're apparently, Ravensdown now is publicly saying, listen, you better get it in now because I think the price of urea has just skyrocketed. Is that for real? Should farmers be concerned about the rising cost of fertilizer?
I think all inputs, to try and grow more food, then all of those sorts of costs are going to increase because with high food costs, people want to grow more. They're going to try and do their best to achieve that as best they can.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thanks to my guests, ASB rural economist James Shortall and Director of the Institute for Research at the University of Waikato, Stuart Locke. We'd love to hear your feedback, so drop me a line on the website. You know what they say, the bigger the boy, the bigger the toy. This is one surefire way to clear out the back shed fast. Keep the faith. See you next time.